Hello, students of the short story. Professor Berninger here. I'm running a little behind. I'm late on my Roman Fever by Edith Wharton talk, so I'm just pushing the button here. We're going to get this done. I like Edith Wharton a lot. Edith Wharton was born Edith Jones, and she was born into an extremely wealthy family, the Jones family. And then she married into a very wealthy family, the Wharton family, and had a pretty dreadful, loveless marriage. She did have one spicy affair. But what I love about her is she really turned her eye on her own people. And those people often come out looking pretty bad. So I'm very impressed when someone not necessarily makes their people look bad, but when someone who is in such an insulated circle like the super rich in America in the late 1800s can somehow get outside of it and see it and write such interesting novels. Her novels are great. Interesting novels and short stories about them, insights into them, and for the most part being critical of them. This story actually, they don't come out looking horrible compared to others, like The House of Mirth. Ooh. So, and she's a great stylist. Her writing is very easy to read, and she's very good. And if you want to visit one of her homes, her summer cottage, you can go over to Lenox, Massachusetts. It's a place called The Mount. Looks like a mansion to me, but for her and her family, it was just a little summer place where she spent a few weeks of the year. But it's an interesting place to visit, and she's a great person to learn about. So Edith Wharton, 2 thumbs up from Professor Berninger for Edith Wharton. Roman Fever. So not the easiest story to follow. I remember the first time I read it, I'm like, who's who, what's going on here? But I figured it out, and I want to help you figure it out if you're still like, huh? And if you did follow what was going on, well, that's good too. We'll talk about bigger stuff. So Roman fever was an illness. Those of you who were in my class last semester, the earlier American Lit class, Daisy Miller died from Roman fever. It was malaria that you would get from mosquitoes, and it could kill you. So Roman fever is gone by the time the girls in the story are out running about. And it was even pretty well gone by the time when these 2 women were young, but their mothers would have had to worry about it. But that's not necessarily the Roman fever we're talking about. We're talking about the Roman fever that Mrs. Got to get the names right. Mrs. Horace Ainsley, that Mrs. Ainsley had for the fiance of Mrs. Slade. So let's just get the facts down of what happened in the past. Mrs. Ainsley had the hots for and the fiance of Mrs. Slade, and he had the hots for her. Mrs. Slade did not like this, of course, so she sent a letter. She sent a letter forged. She sent it like it was coming from her fiance, Mr. Slade, Mr. Delphin Slade, to Mrs. Ainsley. Now, this is in the past, right? This all comes up in the story, but this is like 20 years ago. It says, meet me at the Colosseum. They're in Rome. Now and then. Meet me at the Colosseum, at such and such an hour, and with the implication that our love, we can talk about our love. But Mrs. Slade just wanted Mrs. Ainsley to show up there, have her heart broken because Delphin isn't going to show up because he didn't write the letter, and maybe get sick, not Roman fever, but get sick and just kind of disappear for a while, and then she could marry Mr. Slade without her competition around, and all would be good. Well, what she did not expect was that Mrs. Ainsley would send a letter of reply to the invitation to the Colosseum and say, yes, I'll meet you there. And of course, he when he got it, he was like, oh, all right, you know, even though he didn't send the original invitation. So he goes to the Coliseum that night and they have sex. And she gets pregnant. So this is a big scandal, right? This is a big scandal at that time period. And so the family gets her away and they get her married off to some sort of guy who maybe, you know, rich guy, but maybe he wasn't the most hot, eligible bachelor around, but he'll marry somebody who's pregnant quietly. And they get married and they raise Barbara. And they raise Barbara as their own. But Barbara, who at the time of the story is friends, you know, the two daughters of the two women. Barbara is the child of Mr. Delphin Slade and Mrs. Ainsley. Whoa. Okay. Mrs. Slade doesn't even know that her fiance went to the Coliseum that night. Her husband probably never knew that he had a daughter with Mrs. Ainsley, right? It's all kept hush, hush. So that's what happened about 20 years ago from the time of this story. And that is the information that comes out in the story between the two women, these older ladies who are sitting there looking over the ruins of Rome, right? And they're looking over the ruins of their life. They're looking over their own history, their own past. All right. So they start out, I mean, they're not best of buddies, but they're both of the same social class. They're about the same age. So they sort of put up with each other. And they're sitting together, again, overlooking the ruins. And they're talking about the daughters. Mrs. Slade's daughter, Jenny, is angelic, like the perfect child, does all her homework, always behaves, good looking enough, but not exactly full of flair, right? Not exactly full of flair. But she's rock solid, right? Rock solid. Looks out for her mother's safety. She is the eminent good girl. So there's nothing wrong with. However, right? However, extremely pretty girl who somehow made youth and prettiness seem safe. However, Barbara, the daughter that was conceived at the Coliseum that night, she is described as an angel, and Mrs. Ainsley says Babs is an angel too. And Mrs. Slade says, of course, but she's got rainbow wings. So the daughter, who was conceived at the Coliseum that night, she is angelic but has rainbow wings. So it's not only is she good looking and well behaved, but she's vivacious, right? She's vibrant. She's sort of the it girl, the Diana Frick, right? She could be the Diana Frick of this upper class society. So they're both, so Barbara and Jenny, the daughters of the two women who are conversing in the story, they're both good girls. They're fun, they're young, they're girls to be proud of, girls you would want as your daughter if you had daughters. But the daughter who was conceived at the Coliseum 20 years ago, she has sort of got that extra it factor, right? They're both angels, but she's the angel with rainbow wings. She's more exciting. She's more appealing. She's just got that extra fullness of life about her. The other one is the more safe, content, you know, both fine. And Mrs. Slade can't get over this. She's like, how did two boring people like the Ainsleys, Horace Ainsley and then Mrs. Ainsley here, how did they have such a remarkable daughter who is so fabulous when they're so boring? And she can't figure that out. So that's her mystery here. That's her mystery. That, you know, just doesn't, it's never added up to her over the years. And they've sort of been watching each other over the years, right? They lived across from each other in New York City before the Slades got really, really rich and moved uptown. But they watched each other. They knew when each other was getting new curtains. That's the kind of stuff that matters to them. Oh, curtains. Remember that from a later story time period? Mrs. Wrightson and the curtains from The Country Husband. So, the conversation is flowing along, and Mrs. Slade decides, she's been angry all these years that, maybe angry at herself, angry that her husband, who is so marvelous, Mr. Delphin Slade, and she was so marvelous as the wife, but now she's kind of down a notch because he died. She wants to tell Mrs. Ainsley, for some reason, tell Mrs. Ainsley that she was the one who sent the letter. Okay? So let me find that here. We'll actually pick up there in part 2.